Hey everyone, and welcome to the Privacy in Web3 event put together by Privacy Guardians. First of all, I want to thank the whole team and especially Brando for putting together this event. It's important for us to talk about this in light of the Tornado Cash sanctions and in general just to protect our civil liberties. So a little bit about me. I'm a Web3 researcher and consultant. I specialize in layer 2s, in ZK proofs, in privacy, and DAOs. So today we'll be talking about, first of all, why do you care about privacy? Then we'll be talking about how do we improve privacy protocols to make sure that criminals don't use them. And then the third step is what can you actually do to protect your privacy currently? So why privacy? The sort of most common statement that I hear is, but if I didn't do anything wrong, why would I care? Right? And this is actually something my dad said after the Snowden papers. And sort of the short answer to that is how far are you willing to go to give up your liberties in order to be helping society, right? So the answer I gave to him is, would you be okay having a camera in the house? And the government really promises to not watch it, but maybe you're walking around naked. Like maybe they would watch it. You never know, right? And I think this is a sort of simple and succinct answer to the most extreme cases, right? But it doesn't always have to be extreme. Like here's some examples of why would you want privacy in your regular life, right? So let's say you get paid in crypto. You probably don't want your boss knowing everything you do, right? If you spend 300,000 on a crypto punk, maybe that would make you look a little irresponsible for your boss, right? Maybe you buy porn. There is some privacy that we should be able to have in our normal day-to-day finances, right? Let's say you buy something silly, like Solana, sorry, or AskRocket 69. This is not something you'd probably want your friends to know about, right? Let's say you want to give money to a polarizing political cause or an activism group. So an example of this is I gave money to Ukraine for the war, and honestly, I don't know if I ever can go back to Russia, right? This is not something that I should actually have to think about, but because of the public nature of blockchains, it's actually trackable to my address. And honestly, I'm nervous ever going back, right? Other examples of this is, let's say you give money to abortion activism or to Edward Snowden. There's many cases where you'd want to protect that information. If you're being harassed or abused, this is actually a very big problem. You can track where you are, what you're doing, what you're spending money on. That's not something that you would want your ex to know, right? If you just use a service one time, like Facebook, let's say you post one photo, they shouldn't have your entire financial record just for using it one time. This applies to a lot of companies like gas stations or hotel or hostel. Like you don't want the hostel to know everything you've spent money on just because you happen to use them once, right? And the sort of question that I'd ask is, would you be willing to give your financial statements to every one of your friends, to random people on the street, to the gas station attendant, right? These are fairly private information and they can be used to track you, right? Not just track you, just know more about you than you probably would be willing to give away. Right, and the point is here is if crypto achieves mainstream, if it gets to the point that we all hope that it really does, then everyone's going to know all your information. Retailers, social media, banks, your employers, your friends, your girlfriend, your boyfriend. This is something we need to protect. So, how do we improve privacy protocols to make sure that we can gain our individual civil liberties back, but we don't help any hackers or sanction individuals. So the question that I get for this often is, but if we make money private, then aren't we just helping criminals, right? Don't do hacking. If you're going to be sanctioned, you probably did something wrong. Like, try to live by the golden rule of do unto others as you'd want done to you. I don't support hacking, right? I am okay actually. My government knowing my financial transactions, right? So it's always going to be a line that you try to find with privacy, right? And my argument would be that sort of historically, we always had private money. Throughout human history, there was such a thing as private money, and they weren't traceable besides in person, right? And that kind of changed in the 60s with Nixon, where we started actually tracking financial information on a government level from an individual person. So again, we've had this sort of new paradigm of finances for the last 60 years where this has changed. But honestly, if we gain back privacy, I would argue that we go back to where we always were as humanity throughout human history, right? There's other things that we can do to regulate um, the finances in crypto and make sure that criminals can't use it to benefit themselves. Another example of this is actually the internet, right? The internet is reliant on the fact that we can have privacy, right? That we can have a private account in our bank or that we can have a private Amazon account and not everything can be tracked. And in the internet's case, similar to how I propose we do this for finances, is actually on a protocol level, HTTPS is designed to obfuscate your internet transactions, right? We can't prevent an internet service provider from moving data for you that's private, right? We can't prevent Google from having child porn on it because of the way the indexers work. We can't prevent eBay stopping people from listing illegal weapons on eBay, right? But we can regulate the front ends, right? So we can regulate eBay. We can make sure eBay removes all those listings. Same thing with Google. We can regulate the fact that they can't show copyrighted material or that they can't have content that is not legally allowed, right? So here's some examples of how we can take existing or future privacy protocols and implement some changes to them so that we can make sure that we're not helping criminals or bad actors, right? So the first example is we can generate a proof of not being on a list, right? Without revealing who we actually are. So the idea is you could have in a privacy protocol at the deposit and withdrawal points of essentially you sign a transaction that shows you're not on a sanctioned list, right? And then when you withdraw it again, you would also do this. And because how privacy protocols work and you needing to leave money there for a while, the deposit time is actually probably enough for them to update the list of sanctions or hacker addresses before you can actually withdraw. And this isn't a perfect solution because the question always is if the US sanctions people, do you follow that list? If North Korea sanctions someone, do you follow that list? What about Germany? Right? It gets a little hairy, but honestly, this is something we can do at least in the short to medium term, and honestly, probably long term, to make sure that we stay compliant and that we keep these privacy protocols around for everyone's use, right? Another one is the opposite of that. So you can generate that you are on a list. So you could have your bank, for example, provide a list of addresses that they believe aren't doing any hacking or criminal activity. And then again, you do this on deposit, you do it on withdraw, and this gives the bank time to actually update those lists, right? So if you send money there, turns out you are a hacker, by the time you try to withdraw, you're not going to be able to, right? This is something that actually most privacy protocols already have in them, which is called a viewing key. And this goes back to um, a paradigm called voluntary disclosure. And this is actually how our society works right now. You don't have to show any of your transactions until you get do something wrong, right? Or until there's an audit of your taxes, or the someone gets a legal warrant to see your transactions, and then you can show it, right? Aztec and many other protocols actually already have this implemented in them, right? So I'm okay again showing my transactions for auditors, right? I would be happy to give them the viewing key and then they can view my transactions without being able to spend my money. And I'm sort of privileged for being from a first world country where I trust this, right? But this is a very legitimate option where how we could handle this legally and compliantly. You can also implement daily deposit limits. You can implement it on a per wallet basis or per IP basis or just a total protocol basis. So Aztec actually does this again. They have a list of, I don't know how much it was, 50 ETH or something. So if you have the Nomad or Axie hacks where there's 600 million that you're trying to push through the protocol, it's just not going to work. It's going to give them some days where the protocol team can actually update the protocol and make sure that source of funds can't be laundered through the protocol. And this sort of just mitigates the amount of money that can be pushed through the protocol. Right? Here's some other examples of why we should care about privacy and how they can help other blockchains like Layer 1 Ethereum, right? So this one's actually a pretty big one. If we use something called a private mempool, or we use threshold cryptography to essentially hide the transactions until they get included in the books, and then we reveal them, we can completely eliminate MEV. We can completely eliminate all forms of censorship, right? It's not quite this simple, but honestly, it's not that hard either. I'm not sure why we're not doing this already. And both Ethereum has a proposal for this, and Osmos is actually working on implementing this into their L1. Here's some links for them. Please take a look into this because I'd love to have this conversation sort of more widely talked about in blockchain as a whole, but also Ethereum. Another example is having private NFTs, right? Just because you want to put your NFT as your Twitter or Instagram profile picture probably doesn't mean it should be linked back to your account. Of course, you can always make sort of burner addresses and try to hide it that way, but it's not a perfect solution, and the chances are you already bought that NFT on an account that wasn't a burner address, right? So Vitalik's been talking about something, an idea for essentially stealth ERC 721s, and it's a little bit beyond the scope of this presentation, but open that link with the QR code and give it a read. It's very interesting. So what can you actually do to protect your own privacy in, let's say, ETH, right? You might be able to use a centralized exchange. Maybe, right? Like, as long as your centralized address sort of shuffles addresses every time or changes the addresses every time you deposit and withdraw, this is actually a fairly good way to hide, at least from your friends or your protocols that you're using, what you did with the money, right? This is a big if because a lot of exchanges don't do this, right? So you want to make sure that if you send your money to this address on the exchange, when you withdraw it, it comes from a different address. Otherwise, it's really sort of easy seeing that you sent the money there and withdrew it somewhere else, right? And you do have to sort of trust your centralized exchange at this point as well, but so it's not ideal, but it would work, right? Another idea is a privacy protocol, right? Whether it's a private L1 or a private L2 on top of Ethereum, right? And the whole idea of a privacy protocol is it takes and obfuscates the source and the recipient of the funds, and sometimes also the amounts. And we can use several different technologies for this, like Intel SGX or MPC, but my favorite is ZK, right? Zero knowledge proofs, right? And we can essentially generate a proof locally doing this transaction and then send it to the protocol and send it somewhere else without being able to sort of track it, right? An example of this is Aztec ZK money, right? And there is a sort of key point that I'd like to say that ZK rollups are not the same as zero knowledge rollups. Technically, yes, but they're not actually private, right? So this is something to be aware of. So tracking and privacy is all about a game of mathematical probabilities. So for example, the Axie Infinity hack, we know exactly where that money went, even though the hacker moved it through Tornado Cash. And the reason why we know is he only deposited it there for 1 day. So if someone moves in a crap load of funds and then a day later moves out a crap load of funds that's more or less the same exact amount, we know it's them, right? So there's several different factors that sort of affect your privacy and how mathematically possible it is to guess who you are, right? One of those is the privacy and anonymity set, right? So the more people that use the same exact amounts, the harder it's to figure out who's pulling out that amount, right? So here's a picture of, I believe that's Tornado Cash some months ago before the sanctions. And sort of how much people were depositing in at once, right? So you can see there the tallest bar 1 ETH. So the more sort of um, you align to these values of exactly 1 ETH or exactly zero point 0.1 ETH as a deposit to the protocol, the harder it is to track whose 1 ETH it is, right? So small account amounts are okay. Large amounts are bad. Like don't send 50 ETH there. There's only so many people that have 50 ETH right now, right? Another very bad sort of no-no for doing this is idiosyncratic amounts. Don't send 0.0153273 ETH because that's a lot of digits and it's really easy to guess exactly how many people have that amount in the protocol. Right. Another important factor in this, we talked about this a little bit before, is how long you leave the money there, right? So if you wait 1 day and you just send 50 ETH through, it's pretty obvious, right? But if you send it there, leave it for a year, right? It gets just mathematically exponentially harder to figure out whose money that was, right? Because more and more money keeps coming in and going out, and just statistically it gets really hard to sort of track whose that is. Another way to sort of increase the privacy set of privacy protocols, for example, Aztec has a very cool feature where you can essentially swap tokens against layer one. So, for example, if you have money on Aztec, you could swap 1 ETH for DAI, right? And the more sort of these individual transactions that happen within the protocol, again, the harder to figure out whose money that is based on how much everyone deposited, right? Now, there might be more DAI in the protocol, and the person trying to track it doesn't know where it came from, right? They know that it was swapped against, but they don't know whose DAI that is anymore. So I come from the ETH world, so this is my recommendation is if you want to try to sort of obfuscate your assets on ETH. So let's say you come to a conference, right? And you want to be able to pay with that account. You should have a private wallet. So one example of this would be Aztec Connect, zk.money is the URL, where you can go through this process of sending money in and then sending it to a new account to have sort of an undoxed wallet. Another thing that if you care about privacy, give to crypto advocacy groups. Like examples of this is the EFF, the Coin Center, Blockchain Association. These are all people that are working really, really hard to sort of protect our rights to privacy and make sure that regulators don't step too far, right? Thanks for caring about our privacy. It's really important. It's we sort of placate ourselves with the idea that we can't make that big of a difference as individuals, but the more people that we talk to about this and then we get caring about this and the more we talk about this in the crypto communities, the more likely it is that we'll actually protect our fundamental rights to not be spied upon constantly by anyone that wants to. Right? Give me a follow. I'm ZK Lumi on Twitter. And that's it. Thanks so much for being here today, guys.